Hi, my name is Victoria Karlsson, and this is my Excel VBA project for Dr. Waller's ABE 205 class. So the main focus of my project was to establish a weight calculator for table tennis players looking to improve their game. So I found this interesting study online in which a player looked at the top 50 table tennis players in the world and created an index that showed the average, lower, and upper limits in terms of their weight to height ratio. And this can be shown in the table on the left. And you can see that height was in terms of meters and weight was in terms of kilograms. So to get started, you can click the Begin button and enter the information next to the red boxes. So since we're in the United States, I thought that people are more accustomed to seeing feet, your height in terms of feet, and then your weight in terms of pounds. So these two buttons have been provided to recalculate these values into meters and kilograms in order to match this table so that these values can be identified. So to get started, let's say his name is Bob, and he is 6 foot 2 inches, and this can be recalculated into 1.86 meters. And let's say his weight was 185 pounds, and this can be recalculated into 83.25 kilograms. So if you hit final results, it'll say, "Hello Bob, your current height is 1.86 meters, your current weight is 83.25 kilograms, and your weight is appropriate for your height in terms of being a table tennis player." So that just means that his weight fell in the range for his particular height in terms of the chart mentioned before. Instead, let's do this again, but instead we'll keep Bob at the same height, but we'll change his weight to 200 pounds. You can recalculate that to 90 kilograms. So if you hit final results, it says he may be overweight for your height, and his weight should fall between 73.52 and 85.8 kilograms. And so these two boxes that we recalculated, when you save and close, those two boxes will be saved to these two boxes, and then that information that appeared in the final results will be inputted to this green box. Another feature of this sheet is a graph. So when you're looking at the graph, you see this green line, and that just represents the upper limit of weight in terms of that corresponds to each height, and then this blue line represents the lower limit. And as we said before, Bob was a little overweight, so this makes sense that his two lines are outside this range. If he was an appropriate weight, it would fall between these two lines. So you can close this graph. Unfortunately, the values that were found for this study probably just correspond to males. So I entered it in a way so if, let's say, you were outside this range of values, like say your name was Teresa, and you were 5'1", and you were 120 pounds. Then if you click final results, it says, "Sorry, the values you entered are out of range in terms of the study that was completed." And then also, if you're underweight, it will show that too. It's a feature that can be determined later. So let's hit cancel. So let's look at the code really quickly for this, just to get a sense. So if you click on Weight Calculator, this is the user form for that. If you view code, So these command buttons correspond to the save and final results on the sheet, and this particular row corresponds to the calculation in which the height was converted to meters, and this one was for the weight, for it to be converted to kilograms. This was also for the user form. This shows the combo boxes. These are for the height in terms of feet, and these were for the inches. This is just more code for the pop-up box that appears when you click final results. So I did if-then statements or if-else-if statements. And originally, when I had started this project, I had less values in the range, or less values for height, so I actually had less of these. And then it made sense that I should add more values to make it more appropriate for this project. So I actually had to add many more little paragraphs. And it made more sense to me because a lot of the cells were a little jumbled up, so I had to go in and identify those by identifying their ranges. So let's just look at one really quick at the top. So it's saying, like, if your height was this, or in between the values, then your weight is appropriate. And then if your height was less than the range of values, then you may be underweight. And then it's if your height or your weight was over the values, then you may be overweight. Okay. So that was it for that one. And there was also a module for that one just to have the dialog box show for the weight calculator. So this is to run it and then close it. Okay. So I also had one more page in which I did what's your ranking after a tournament. So when I was doing research on table tennis, which I didn't really know too much about, it showed that when you enter a competition, you might have an initial ranking, and then after the tournament, you can gain or lose in your ranking position. So this whole sheet was to calculate your final ranking. So to get started, you can click on the instructions, which appears a message box. And I'll just summarize the instructions that are here. It basically says to first enter your initial ranking. So let's say you're 66. And if you entered a tournament without having a ranking, then you could put 0 there. And then I used an array for step number 2, in which, depending on how many matches you did, it would input it to this column here, column D. So let's say you did 5 matches, and you clicked this button, it would just show the 5 that you did. But in terms of this video, we'll just do the full 10. Oh, and also, when you entered your initial ranking here, it entered it automatically into this column. For the player that is using this sheet, their responsibility is just to fill out the boxes that are yellow. So in a table tennis match, the score is best out of 11. So you could enter your score here. So if you, let's say the best you can get would probably be a 6. So I already entered a few for the purpose of saving time. And these were calculated just by saying 11 minus this number. Those aren't really used in the equations later, so this was the main focus. And then the player who's using the sheet is also responsible for inputting the opponent's ranking if they have one coming into the tournament, so they can put that here. And then there's an equation in these cells in which the opponent's ranking your initial ranking is subtracted from the opponent's ranking. So if this is negative, that means that your initial ranking was higher than your opponent's. And so this column is also the responsibility of the player, and if you won the match, you put a 1 in the particular row, and if you lost it, you put a 0. So this is a little complicated, but I'm going to do my best to explain. So after each match, you could earn a certain amount of points depending on your ranking and also if you won or lost the match. So if you won the match and your ranking is lower than your opponent's, that means you could gain 2 points. If you won the match and your ranking is lower than or greater than your opponent's, then you would just get 0 points. And if you lost the match and your ranking is lower than your opponent's, then you would get 0 points. And if you lost the match and your ranking was higher than your opponent's, then you would lose 2 points. And as I was reading about table tennis, they just do a sort of system so that you wouldn't lose too many points in case you are lower than your opponent in ranking. So it's a pretty cool system. And I had to tweak it a little bit because their point system was a little complicated, so I made it a little more simpler so that it made sense to me when I inputted the equations into the code. So I already filled out the yellow boxes, and the next thing you do is just to press calculate, and that inputs whether or not you got -2 points, 0 points, or 2 points. And then your final ranking takes your initial ranking here and then adds this entire column to it for your final ranking. So your final would be 60. So let's look at the code. Sheet 3. So this one is just for the message box. This is the array I used to input the number of matches. So I defined it and then redimensioned it so that it would go from 1 to the number of matches that you inputted. And then the range was in the column value from D11 to D20. And then this subroutine was to calculate the formula for these blue boxes for the points awarded. So just a little summary of that. We'll just look at this one right here. So let's say you're looking just at this one. This one is talking about the difference in ranking. So if your difference in ranking is less than 0, that means that you had a higher ranking than your opponent. And then this value here is talking about whether you won or lost, and if you put a 0 in for that value, that means you lost. So that means the value inputted there would be -2 because you had a higher ranking and you lost the game, so you lose some points. And then here again, this means that you had a lower ranking than your opponent and you lost, and you don't lose any points for that. And then for this one, you had a higher ranking than your opponent and you won, and you get 0 points for that, just because. And then for this one, you had a lower ranking than your opponent, but you won the match, so you deserve to get 2 points. And then I did that for each column because I wanted to see if it would work, so I did that for each row. And that's my code for that, and that's my project. I hope you enjoyed watching, and thank you.